Pioneering surf parks took 10 years to go from pipe dream to paying customers. 10 years! How can digging a hole, filling it with water, agitating that water, and asking people for money be so incredibly complicated? Today's WavePool projects get done on a much shorter timeline, thanks to lessons learned from those early adopters in the space. In WavePoolMag sessions, we hear from the brightest minds in the business. Everything's on the table topic-wise, from choosing a tech provider to maximizing food and beverage revenue, and more. So join us for WavePoolMag sessions. Welcome to the WavePoolMag Friday Sessions episode. Today is really exciting. We're talking about water clarity and all things water as they are in wave pools for surfing. My guests today are Brad Clawson and Nick Neuman. Welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Great. Good to have you guys. Now, from your respective companies, you deal with this constantly, all the time. People building, surf park, and they need to have their water filtration system set up. I don't know a whole lot about this subject, but we were prompted by colleagues in the industry, like this is kind of a hot button topic at the moment due to legislation. And I know a lot of projects have run into trouble when they've been ready to go live, to go online. And then, all of a sudden we're under the same legislation as an Olympic swimming pool, which is something that's impossible to do if you're running surfers through. So let's just start off with a brief background from each of you. Brad, why don't you start about yourself and the company?
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian. So I'm Brad Clawson. I'm a licensed professional engineer at Cloward H2O. We're a aquatic engineering design firm that's been in business since the 1970s. About half our works are international. The other half is domestic in the U.S. Just completed our 1,000th project last year, so that was exciting. We've kind of specialized in what we call recreational aquatics. So pools, splash pads, water parks, all the behind the scenes work that no one cares about unless it's broken, basically.
Okay.
And the surf industry has been one we've been involved in for a while, and it's just an exciting new space to be part of and to design to. But it's got interesting constraints to it.
Okay, great. And then Nick, tell us about yourself and your company.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Nicholas Neuman. I'm a project developer at Water Technology, and very similar to Brad and Cloward, we're aquatic engineers that work on recreation and entertainment-based aquatic attractions. Here in North America, where both our respective companies are based, and also Brad and I and our companies have the pleasure of working internationally. So projects in the Middle East, the Far East, South America, so on and so forth. So yeah, we're both pretty lucky at the work we do, and it's fun work. It really is fun work. It's engineering, and Brad's right. I actually like that behind the scenes stuff that you don't really think about until it's broken. And but it does allow us to go to fun places and be involved in an engineering-based hospitality entertainment product. And myself personally, I'm not an engineer, but in my position, I work on the front end of design, connecting engineering, budgeting, scheduling, and usually stick with a client all the way through the course of a project, then facilitating other team members. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're both, I think, in my view, extremely lucky to be involved in such endeavors.
Okay, right on. Thanks for taking your time out to join us today and kind of explain to the surf park industry where water quality fits in. I mean, your backgrounds have been with, as you said, with water parks and splash pads and slides and things like that. What have you noticed trending in the past few years as far as like surf parks? Is this going to make up a huge chunk of your business? Is it everyone's talking about it? What do you see from the perspective of your company with surf parks entering the space?
I think from our perspective, it's certainly a niche. I don't know that it'll take over. Like our main business is resort work. I don't know that it'll ever supersede that, but it is a certainly a growing market. There's a lot of interest there, and it's certainly something where the project timelines are just way longer than the typical project we deal with in a different venue. So that's just one thing that, it takes years sometimes to get these things permitted with the city or wherever they're being built. And so the timelines itself kind of lend it to be kind of a slower industry for us, but still definitely one we're excited about for sure.
Okay, right on. And then, Nick, I wanted to ask you, how does water filtration work in a surf lagoon,
Sure.
compared to like a water slide or a swimming
Yeah.
pool, and why it's so different?
Well, I think, and that's a good question. And I think if you look at surf-based venues versus more water park, traditional, or as we understand to be an entertainment-based water park venue, when we look at the sporting aspect of surf versus the kind of the social or recreation aspect of a water park, the planning, design, guest experience, operations are very different. And that does inform upon how that surf component fits with an overall facility or development. When we start talking about water clarity now within that surf pool, and we contrast that to, 50, 60 years of water park, design, engineering practice, it's not so much a new space, but an evolution of some of that thinking and some of those practices into a venue if I'm going to beg a geometry term, they're very similar, but they're not congruent. And so if you treat a surf pool like a swimming pool, I guess to really break it down in a very general way, you're probably going to overshoot it. And the systems and the approach is not going to be fit for practice. That being said, I know that within the surf space, water filtration, water quality, how we deal with codes, which I know will probably be a later on question. But there's a lot of, at some point in time, there's perspectives of like, we're in a brand new frontier, and we are, how the public will interact with these facilities. But there is a very strong foundation, thinking, rationale, logic of how we go about treating the water within these facilities. The challenges are different, very much so. I think I kind of rounded the question there a little bit.
No, that's good. That helps give us some background as we go into that. And you mentioned water clarity.
Mm.
Now you have to do so much filtering, and I know there's Josh Martin from Martin Aquatics. He spoke with us, and he had mentioned the water going through and having certain amount of time for changeover. Can one of you explain how the filtration system works, just in layperson terms?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, or Nick, you can. Either way.
Go for it.
Go for it, Brad.
Yeah, basically, the kind of nuts and bolts of it are, you have your recirculation or treatment pump, or in this case, for a surf lagoon, you'd have pumps, plural, many of them sometimes, or large ones. And those pumps pull water from the surf basin and then send it to filters. And those filters clean out, up to, 1 to 5, sometimes 10, depending on the type of filter, but down to a certain level of micron range of contaminant particles or whatever's in the water. And then once it goes through the filter, oftentimes you do what's called a secondary sanitation system, which is either a UV system or an ozone system to help with water clarity and also pathogen control. Just trying to keep the water clean and safe. And then per code, all the health departments want to see a minimum residual sanitizer in the water, aka chlorine. So once the chlorine dosing and that's kind of the last thing about the filtration system is it gets dosed, and then that water gets recirculated back into the basin. And the idea is you pull water out somewhere and you put water in somewhere else, and you try and create even distribution of clean water. And by default, a measurable residual sanitizer that Bob from the health department can go in and measure and say, yep, there's chlorine here.
Say that 3 times fast. Measurable residual sanitizer.
Yeah. But so that's kind of the basics of it. So your flow rate, it all depends on like Josh was telling you about the turnover rates. You have your volume of water, and you have to find a flow rate and an exchange time, and that determines the size of equipment you need, and how much chemical you use and all that. So I hope I kind of explained it. But
Yeah, that's a good background. Nick, would you like to pick up on any of that?
You see my fidgeting over. Yeah, no, and Brad, perfectly spoken too. It's a good, very general overview. When it comes to surf parks, one of the key words that we hear within the engineering space and water quality space is turnover. And the relationship between the turnover of the pool, or how much time it takes for the total volume of water to pass through the filtration system for one pass, that's really kind of that is one of the hot buzzwords. And turnover is important. It's by far the most varied criteria performance stat that we see through different codes, regions, jurisdictions, operator perspectives. And as the surf industry has kind of started in the ground floor and has advanced over a number of years here, there's been different turnovers applied to different pools. The turnover is important. It does have a relationship to the sizing of our filtration system. And very often these projects, because of the size, large surface areas, large volumes of water, the turnover can have a substantial impact on the size of equipment. And then as that trickles down, these projects are very budget driven, very budget sensitive. I actually haven't come across the project in any venue that's not budget sensitive, but the sensitivity around the size of these projects. So there is a push from developers or a viewpoint of like, how can I minimize this filtration system down to the absolute bottom? That's where the conversation of turnover becomes very important. Brad made a great point out the gate, as I would always expect, is the word distribution. And turnover is important. You need to have a good turnover to be able to make sure we're maintaining some level of safe, clear, clean water. But you can have a great turnover with poor distribution. Distribution mean how we're going to distribute the water throughout the pool, the clean water back through the pool. If we have a bunch of dead spots, then a fast turnover is not going to benefit us. So there really is a balance here of how we're going to go about approaching the engineering system for these pools. And frankly, if you're looking at different pool types and bathymetry and sizing, it all layers in a role, or layers an impact to those decisions. And I think one of the more frustrating things within the industry is there is a view of, well, if we have a filtration system, isn't one size fit all? Can't we just design one system and just plug it in? And there is lots of variables that we have to consider for the betterment of the project.
Okay. And then that leads me to the next question. Is this material like off the shelf? Like I can order a giant reverse osmosis system or whatever you're using and plug it in? Or is each component like highly customizable and specialized for the project? Like I'm assuming you have, okay, we've got a 100-meter Olympic-sized swimming pool. I know what filtration system steps going to need? Okay, I have an endless surf 3600 wave pool system. I know what system that will use, or does it vary a lot?
Um, it kind of yes and no. You can generalize a system more or less on the flow rate you have and kind of what equipment that would fit. So I mean, you have to design a system that someone can build, right? So they have to be able to go buy a pump, have to be able to go buy the filters. So there it is. It does kind of work that way, but at the same time, like Nick was saying, I completely agree. It can be completely variable. You know, a endless surf or whatever brand of lagoon you're doing for surf, if it's in the middle of the desert, it's going to have different needs than something in Pennsylvania or something surrounded by a bunch of trees. And it also, you know, you need to adjust it based on your use case. How many bathers, how many surfers are you going to have in there? And there's a lot of variables in there that can affect the recommendation on the type of system and how large it should be.
Okay, and when you say recommendation, you mean the recommendation from the city, or you recommending to the developer what they need?
Yeah. So I think at least here in the Southwest US, water use is a big concern. So if you're using a sand filter system, you're gonna potentially waste a lot of water to clean those filters. So you might need to consider having a backwash recovery system to try and recycle a lot of that water you use to clean the filters, or use a different type of filtration system, such as regenerative media filters that use substantially less water to filter the pool or the surf basin. So there's different types of technology out there that you can use, and it just kind of depends on what makes sense for the location.
Okay.
I think to that. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna
a lot
say it.
a lot of the equipment we are seeing though is readily available within a marketplace. So we talk about regenerative media filtration, or pumps, or sand filters, or glass media. The systems that Brad and I would be interfacing with directly. Luckily, there is some what's the right word I want to say? There is some establishment of that equipment within the space, and so we can take that, and how we put that equipment together, be it a combination of sand filtered or RM or whatever it may be. So that's versus if we look at the wave technology itself, those are very customizable. So we have this dichotomy of kind of some generalist type systems, which are still specialized and catered to the pool, and then very specialized, usually fairly sophisticated wave generation equipment.
So yeah, that leads to my next question: is it you must have established some kind of rapport with one technology and maybe not another. Is there, can you share with us some of the technologies you've worked with, and what you've been able to install to filter their water?
Certainly.
You want
Brad, you want
or
let's stick to our rhythm here. I think it's working out all right.
okay. Yeah, so the typical options, I would say, you know, are sand filters, which those have been around for a long time. And they can get huge. 16 feet long, 6-foot diameter. They can get quite large. Just to handle the flow rates, because with these surf basins, you're pushing, tens of thousands of gallons a minute potentially, and that all has to get through the appropriate filter rating. So we've designed, 12 million gallon, 30 million gallon systems, and they have just filter bank after filter bank. You know, all kinds of stuff going on. They get quite complex. And then so that's a pretty common, readily available technology that it's reliable. And we use it quite often. Regenerative media filters is another great option. They're kind of like more newer in the market, I would say. And their kind of claim to fame is they can get space savings as compared to a sand filter in the mechanical room and use like 95% less water when it comes to cleaning the filter when it gets dirty. They do cost more upfront than a sand filter system, but oftentimes you can make up that savings and just pure water savings. You can make up that difference in a couple years from an operations perspective. So those are the two filtration technologies we would mainly recommend for something like this. And that's kind of typical for the industry, I would say.
Okay, Nick, would you like to add maybe some of the technologies that you've worked with and what kind of systems you've used in those instances?
Certainly. Thank you. And really the systems that we would consider in terms of large pieces of equipment, kind of commodity pieces of equipment, filtration equipment, would be very similar to what Brad had just cited, kind of a traditional sand filtration or regenerative media type filtration, with regenerative media being the more water efficient of those two options. And for our experience in the surf pools that we have, which are, I believe we have one filling with water probably as we speak. It's based in a desert, kind of a desert environment or very arid environment. So water usage is an absolute driver to the project. So in that scenario, it was a total logical fit or a great fit to have something that was water conscious and use less water. But the capital cost is a little bit greater up front. And arguably, I think if you look at the operation of it too, it takes a bit of training versus a sand filtration system, which will be larger in size, will use more water, but is much easier on a budget, especially for a project out of the gate. And I think arguably can be simplified to a point where the operation of it is really easy to work into a daily maintenance routine. So, I mean, those are pieces that we find and we're kind of looking at that are, I don't want to say commodity, but most every pool you're going to see is going to have filtration on it or should have filtration, mechanical filtration of some sort. As we begin to look at other processes, Brad made a mention earlier in kind of talking about the overall aquatic water treatment system to secondary or auxiliary disinfection. So looking at ultraviolet, looking at ozone type systems, these systems then would be applied in addition to a filtration system then to get rid of organics and pathogens and nasty bugs within the water. And to me, that's going to be the secret. That's going to be the secret sauce for surf pools as we look into the future. And not just sizing these systems up to meet that volume, but finding a smart way to put them in combination or put them in line or have a slipstream where we have ability to really clean that water. And I think that if I was to guess, there's going to be a technology that will evolve within our space, something in that secondary disinfection type approach. And we've already, we've been looking at different things in terms of AOP and other combinations, and these are the things that Brad and the group at Cloward would be very familiar with as well, and very appropriately to be able to handle such engineering systems. But that's my hunch that we're kind of adapting a swimming pool mentality to a different type of product. I do see evolution of that space, or at least there's room for it, most certainly.
Okay, good. And that I'd like to venture into that, adapting swimming pool standards to a surf pool. I know there's some of the wave action helps clean the water. I don't know if that's taken into account. How, maybe you can share some of your stories with getting a water filtration system approved for a project that maybe the local jurisdiction considers it a swimming pool, a community swimming pool. And you're waving your arm saying, no, it's for surfing. It's very different. Can you share some of those, like how it experiences you've had where you've had to convince the local board that it's different?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely want to avoid the word pool.
Oh yeah, that's ironically, I would agree. I would totally agree.
We're gonna have to change the name of our platform then.
Spell it differently, maybe.
Yeah, pool's a dangerous word because, well, first of all, the health departments at the county level are going to be the ones inspecting and, checking in on these things. And if they have a problem, they're going to shut you down. At least in the U.S., that's how it would work. I assume it'd be similar elsewhere. But the problem is swimming pools are very heavily regulated. There's a lot of codes out there. And a lot of it is just because the amount of people that can be in a pool. Oftentimes, a swimming pool is designed for one person for every 20 square feet of surface area. Whereas in a surf basin, that's just not even realistic, not even close. And thankfully, the Model Aquatic Health Code stipulates one person for every 1,000 square feet, which is a lot better. But yeah, a recent experience we just had, we've got a project in Texas. They just broke ground for a surf basin, and meeting with the health department, they're like, we need to have a turnover every 2 hours because it's this big pool. And we're like, no. The client's like, that'll kill the project because now your treatment system is moving a couple 100,000 gallons a minute. It's just ridiculous. Your treatment system is going to need several megawatts of power just to operate. So you can't go there. You really can't. And so the Model Aquatic Health Code's been really good with their recent update. Just saying they don't prescribe a specific turnover time. They basically just say it has to be certified by a licensed engineer, and it has to meet water quality parameters. Kind of similar to what you would find at like a lake or a beach. If someone goes out there and tests the water and it's not safe, they're going to shut it down. And that's kind of, surf basins are kind of in between that and the pool. They're kind of a middle ground there where they do have a recirculation system because they're an artificial water body, but they're obviously not a pool, but they're not a natural water body either. So trying to find that middle ground there where they're still kind of regulated and they need to be safe, but not prescribed to a swimming pool criteria.
Very good. And that great explanation. Thank you for sharing that story. And then Nick, have you run into something similar in your projects?
We certainly have tales, which we could probably do a separate session on. The heart of the matter, I would say, is that even the surf industry is not unique to this scenario, this experience. I mean, if you look at and it's interesting between the kind of the specificity of the nomenclature we'd break down. And if I'm looking at a water park, an entertainment water park project, let's say, some of the pools and attractions that I'll deal with won't even appropriately adhere to a pool code. And a pool code typically is going to be considered one single body of water. And some pool codes can be quite, some pool codes is based on a more simplistic pool design. I'm trying to choose my words here properly so I don't slander a code, but so it's like making sure to have a code that is appropriate for the attraction that we're designing. In the case of a surf pool, because we have so much water, and as Brad talks about, the density or the loading of those pools, at the end of the day, really the bottom line is to make sure that we're controlling RWI, recreational water illnesses, and providing the clarity of that water. And if you look at a surf pool, the organic loading or the patron loading on those pools, the density is so much lower than we're going to find in a water park condition. So at a surf pool, depending on how many wave sessions we're going to do per hour or the way the pool is laid out, we could have 30, 40 people. If we look at a water park type scenario where you could have hundreds of people within a pool, it's a totally different experience and a totally different approach. So to look at the two through the same lens is really unfair and probably not the most objective way to approach it. With that being said, many of our experiences going back now over the last 5 years have been those of education with different authorities and codes, a lot of transparency among calculations, how we're looking at sizing of systems, how do we stand behind a system, what's the rationale, using a swimming pool mentality or a swimming pool kind of approach, maybe then filtered through a water park lens and then adapted to the surf park industry. But still, it's, from my perspective, there's still way too much range and way too much variance throughout the industry. I mean, I see surf pools of different volumes that can have turnover rates ranging from 7 hours upwards of 24. And
yeah, I want to stop you to that. So is that just kind of a roll of the dice depending on where your pool is? Like if my pool is located in this community, it's going to be legislated this way and they'll want 7 hours, but this other pool lucked out and it's 2-hour turnover. Is it that?
I think there could be,
lineage?
I think there's yes and no. I mean, I think definitely there's definitely jurisdictions and areas and locations where there's going to be, more of a higher standard of care because maybe there's other attractions around you or there's kind of a basis or a barrier of entry. Certainly to me, it's more influenced by time and the pools, the Gen 1 pools I saw come into the marketplace, probably had stricter requirements or were held to a stricter requirement. As we learn more, as things evolve, as the industries continue to grow, certainly having the Model Aquatic Health Code, cite surf pools, give them their own category, create this conversation. And the industry's been great for it too. I mean, the surf industry, surf parks and water parks are not the same. I say that quite a bit. And rightly so. They should be different. They have different functions and end user and guest experiences. But the conversation has been one that's been very open. I've been really enthused and really, really very optimistic in the last 2 years or so. The conversation has really come to the top. Platforms like this where we're able to talk about it and discuss it. It's not the most enthralling topic, but it certainly is an important one.
Okay, and that's you mentioned the Model Aquatic Health Code.
Correct.
Hope I got that right. How is that helped, and is that something that came into being yesterday or a few years ago, or it's constantly evolving? Could you touch on that code?
Yeah, it's been around for a while. It's constantly evolving. They have a yearly meeting that we attend, going over proposed changes, proposed updates, discussions on things like surf parks that need to be added. So the surf park guidance itself is new within the last several months. But it also helps inform, since the Model Aquatic Health Code is sponsored by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, by the government. And it helps inform the states on what their code should be. So a lot of states are developing their own swimming lagoon codes, surf lagoon codes. Texas and Florida and even Utah are some of the states that have their own separate code for large water bodies that are intended to be swam in and stuff like that. So it kind of gets, I don't know, there's a lot of code out there.
Okay.
It can kind of get frustrating because, we work all over the place. I'm sure Nick runs into this too. It's like, I can't remember which code says what. You always have to go back and forth. And so having a centralized standard from an agency like the MAC, the Model Aquatic Health Code, helps inform states when they're developing their own and adjusting their own codes to say, hey, this is what we should look at and prescribe our codes to. So I think it's hugely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's and this, I mean, I don't know what the civilian perspective would be, but yeah, the amount of code from a very local to a state to a national level can vary greatly, and depending on the pools or what we're working on. And if we get out of we get out of a U.S. mind frame or status, and we start looking, you know, Europe, Far East, Middle East, there's some places where they have a really well-developed code and it's easy to kind of take on work. And there's other places where the codes, Saudi Arabia, for example, which has a huge boom of projects, a huge boom of tourism, and the code basis for many aspects are really trying to catch up and make sure that we align. So the Model Aquatic Health Code has been, I think, very positive in the fact of providing guidance. And it is a guideline too. So we call it a code, but it's a guideline to be adopted. It's been very helpful to begin to reference different different portions of that code within areas that maybe lack a code or don't have that basis, or if we're trying to help provide some logic. I think that's been extremely helpful. That being said, there is many instances where you find code that will be in contradiction of each other, and that's the more difficult place. I've definitely had that happen a number of times where we've adopted a Model Aquatic Health Code. We've agreed, provisionally with those at the table and authorities that this is the right way to go. And then another code pops up, which is in contradiction of a few points. And you just have to work your way through it. Our approach is always early, often transparency. If we want to be talking to owners, educating the team, and if we can actually connect with code officials up front, if that's appropriate and they're open to meeting them with people, with engineers, and then we try to open some of these conversations early, so there's not surprises on either side, for owners, for the design team, or for anyone doing permits or operational certifications.
Okay. And then as you go into that, there's more what I'm getting at is there seems to be a perception that projects want to spend as little money as possible. I mean, on the investment side, that makes sense, but there is a certain level of safety that you have to meet to ensure you're not making your customers sick. And in doing that, it seems like it's you have your guidelines, and that helps. I wanted to shift over to costs, because I've heard very different numbers for how much like a filtration system costs on a $30 million standalone WavePool project or a $50 million standalone WavePool project. Water filtration within that, can you speak to the percentage of costs that I'm going to spend on filtration?
Yeah, I would say you should expect to spend a couple million in equipment and piping, because the other thing too to consider is you got to run, the water doesn't move itself. You got to have pipes. So you got to dig trenches, and those trenches can really get pretty long. So that all that behind the scenes work to move the water and clean the water, it's a substantial cost for sure for these types of projects.
And then and then there's more if someone wants to hide the tanks, or they want to go from sand to osmosis or such, correct?
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick. Yeah, sorry.
Well, and I think it's hard to. I mean, look, it's the best. It's the most often asked question, I would say, and the worst answered question. The most poorly answered question is like, how much? It's almost like the question is, how much does the car cost? It depends on the features we want to include, and if we want to have different packages, And so I think for the car scenario, when we look at the water treatment scenario, how much does that cost? I mean, there's definitely a foundation and the basis. On a $30 million project, you're going to be talking, as Brad said, a couple of million dollars for a total water treatment system and distribution, piping, circulation, chemical systems. But there is a lot of variance within that budget realm. And then one of the things that's really important, I mean, the capital cost up front is I mean, that's usually king, I would say, because people are trying to develop projects. They're usually these projects are fairly entrepreneurial in the sense of the developments that they're going into. Um, Early adapters. The surf market is cool, right? I mean, the surf market does embody something different than the aquatics market hasn't in the past. So a lot want to get in there, be the first in. So the capital cost is huge. The cost of ownership, long-term operation, though, cost is a really important piece that it's a conversation that we're constantly having. So we're always looking at, here's the budget, here's the cost, if we have to kind of simplify it, here's the cost for our filtration system. And then to the best of our ability, be able to project out, what do we have for staffing? As Brad touched on earlier, water usage. Are we going to send all of our dirty, quote unquote, dirty water, our discharge water? Are we just going to send that away? Are we going to try to keep that water on site and use it for something else, irrigation, gray water, others? Because it is a fairly substantial amount of water, depending on how the system is set up. So the capital cost up front, wildly important. The long-term operation or the cost of ownership, equally important. And a conversation that if you're just looking at your bottom line and not entertaining those ideas, or I would say it's probably an important conversation to bring into your space.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's because these recirculation systems, they have to be running all the time. If you're not running waves, it doesn't matter. Your treatment system still needs to be going. So your pumps, they can be, depending on the size, you could be talking a couple 100 kilowatts continuously of power that you got to pay for to keep your water clean. So it can add up.
Just to jump in for a second, sorry if I'm jumping on top of you. That's a really good point. I think there is a perception that, we run the wave systems and it pushes the water all over the place and mixes it up. Isn't that's pretty good for distribution? And it is. I wouldn't agree. It is fantastic for distribution. But the standard that Brad and I would be held to, or our respective companies would be, to make sure that pool maintains a water clarity and cleanliness when the water's at acquiescence. So we're not running wave systems.
So so be sure I get this straight. So the systems, the codes are set for water in a wave pool or surf basin when there is no wave action.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to think if a code actually calls out the difference between the two, but I'm trying to think of actually language that I would reference from a code that would talk about systems on or systems off. But I think regardless of the code, the approach that we both would have, or the way we would consider this, looking at distribution, looking at turnover, looking at the application of a system, would be one where we don't have the benefit of the waves moving the water. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. But the waves certainly help.
Okay. And then as we close out, thank you so much for taking the time to jump into this. I'm sure there's some things I haven't covered. I would like to take this opportunity to have you jump in and say, okay, well, we covered this, and this, but Brian forgot to mention this. And now's your chance to share with our viewers what something we missed during this podcast.
I think we had a pretty good conversation and brought up a lot of good points. I think the main point, I know we brought up budget a lot, but really your guests are going to care and your guests are going to notice the water quality. So I think it is certainly worth the investment in a good filtration system that keeps the water clean. Just because that's your selling point. I mean, water, we always joke with our architects you work with on projects, like the marketing photos are always of the water and the landscapes like in the background, like, you guys did good design work for the pool, which is ours, right? The water is what attracts people. It's the attraction. It's what people want to spend time in. It's what they want to look at. It's what they want to experience. So having good water quality is paramount.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's why I just wanted the investment in that system is certainly worth it.
And Nick, would you
I think it's.
on water
I actually have
clarity?
I have a very similar point here too, in that when you look at a SWOT analysis of a wave pool, what are the strengths and risks and weaknesses, and we're talking in a surf pool. We have big water, big surface area, big volumes. We have big systems in terms of water vessels, different technologies to contain that water and create those pools, and wave systems and wave technology. So I mean, there's a lot of potential risk. There is, I think, a responsibility as an engineer, and as we work with ownership groups, that you are providing, number one, like Brad says, the cleanliness of the water, the perception of the experience. If we're gonna endeavor to have a genuine, strong, worthwhile, sustainable, not just from the points of looking at the energy and the water usage, but even commercially sustainable, clear water for the perception of the guest to go and have a surf day. It's number one. It's absolutely paramount. And I would argue that it's one of those things that, like, it's you wouldn't even notice it. It's expected. You wouldn't notice it until it was there. If you show up someday and the water is green, that's going to kind of sour that experience for someone to want to show up. So from a market standpoint, there's a responsibility, and then making sure that we have clean water where people can recreate, and not be at the risk of different sicknesses or pathogens, or I mean, there's some nasty stuff you can get in the water if not treated properly. And so they kind of work hand in hand, but two very, very different responsibilities that stem from the same place. So
Okay, right on. Thank you for jumping in there with that bit that we had forgotten to address. And Brad, Nick, I want to thank you very much for joining us, taking time out of your day to share your knowledge.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having us.
Okay, and where can we see your next project open? And when can we go surfing? Are you allowed to talk about that?
I can talk about one of them. Yeah, they've got desert surf in Southern California. It's they're pouring concrete, so it's been a long time coming. They had to wait a few years because the power company couldn't get their power service to them at the size they needed. So,
Right. And Nick, where can we surf?
well, yeah, as I'm sitting here, I regret not checking. I don't know how much. This is the one thing about the surf industry that I find to be very interesting, and we find this in the entertainment water park space as well. Is that, but even more so in the surf space, things are very held very tight by clients, and kind of when they're talking about projects, a lot of secrecy, a lot of cloak and dagger throughout the surf industry, which is exciting. But yes, we will have some waves here rolling, I would say, in the next number of weeks here, somewhere in the Middle East, and you'll certainly hear about it as that comes up. So
exciting. Hope we get
100%.
to venture over there and check it out. So thanks again, and we'll hopefully see you again.
Perfect. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, right on, guys.